you could see water becoming a major source of conflict between nuclear-armed nations. Livestock farming is simply not justifiable. At the moment, it's 5 times more expensive to eat a healthy diet than it is to eat one that's merely adequate. Hi, my name is George Monbiot, and I'm here at Penguin to answer some big questions. There's an unsafe assumption about our future food supply, that it can rise to meet growing human demands, by about 50% by 2050. But that assumption is based on several notions which don't seem to play out. And one of those is that we can increase the use of irrigation water by roughly 150% by 2050. Just one problem: it doesn't exist. The fresh water we need is not available. And so the idea that we can trigger further productivity by irrigating more just is for the birds. It just isn't there to be done. And as a result of these unsafe assumptions, with everyone assuming they can use more and more, water becomes a major potential security flashpoint. And the place where that's most evident is the Indus Valley. The waters of the Indus River are shared by 3 nuclear powers: India, Pakistan and China. They pass through many highly unstable regions, great deal of insecurity there already, and everyone is expecting to just keep growing and growing on the basis of getting more water out of the river. But already almost all the available water is extracted, and there's plans to use 40% more by 2035. Well, how's that possibly going to work? So with this huge growth premised on the idea of extra water, and with declining water supplies, you could see water becoming a major source of conflict, deadly conflict potentially, between nuclear-armed nations. I'm not at any point calling for farming to come to an end, but I am calling for animal farming to come to an end. I believe that livestock farming is simply not justifiable. If we look at intensive livestock farming, where we get the great majority of our meat, we're talking about appalling animal cruelty. I mean, animals packed into these massive factories, very little stimulation, no possibility of creating any social structure, growing at horrendous rate, often with terrible health effects associated with that, breeding grounds for pandemics and other illnesses. But then also, the dung from the animals has to go somewhere. And what we see, even in countries like the UK, is every catchment where there is major intensive animal production, the rivers are dying or dead because there's so much dung being produced by these animals. It gets dumped in the fields. They call it fertilization, but there's far too much for the land to absorb, washes off into the rivers, and that kills the rivers. It's just unsupportable. So people then say, oh, well, then let's have free range, extensive, pasture-fed meat. And it might be slightly kinder to the animals, but it's absolutely devastating ecologically because it requires a huge amount of land. It's a really inefficient way of producing food. And you can see that from the fact that while 12% of the world's surface is used for growing crops, 28% of the world's surface is used for grazing animals. And the amount of protein we get from animals which rely on grazing alone is just 1% of the world's protein. You know, the only reason that you and I could eat a steak or a lamb chop, which has been produced by an animal living outdoors eating grass, is that we've devoted enormous tracts of the planet to this incredibly inefficient and profligate way of producing food. It's the major cause of habitat destruction. It's what's wiping out forests and wetlands and all the other places which the rest of life on Earth requires to survive. It's not morally justifiable. We need a whole new ethical compass now, which relates to our relationship with the living planet. And one of the first things that compass points to is we have to stop eating animal products. But the good news is it's much easier now than ever before, not least because there are whole new ways of producing protein and fat and turning them into an enormous range of foods, not just substituting the meat and milk and eggs that we eat today, but all sorts of things we haven't even thought of yet. I mean, it's a bit like when agriculture first came along. I mean, no one who first domesticated a wild cow and aurochs was thinking of camembert, were they? But somehow camembert emerged from that process. And there's inconceivable foods which we will produce from these new technologies. I mean, really exciting foods, and we can make them much healthier than animal products, much better matched to our dietary needs, with an absolutely tiny fraction of the environmental impact. I'm constantly being told it's too late. We've blown it. We've gone past the point at which we can stop climate breakdown. Often by people who made no effort at all to stop climate breakdown. In fact, who denied its very existence for a long time and then suddenly flipped from denial to despair, with no in-between stage saying, yes, it's real and we should do something about it. And I see this idea of it being too late to stop as just another form of denial, another way in which people can wash their hands of the problem and say, nothing to do with me, Gov. Now, obviously, because we have left it so long, a great deal of damage has already been done. But with every action we take, we reduce the amount of damage that will be done. And there is enormous scope now for taking action, not just to decarbonise our economies, but to draw down carbon dioxide that we've already released into the atmosphere. But governments don't step up on issues like this until they're forced to by people. And so we need a mobilisation which is bigger than anything we've ever seen before. Now, before the pandemic, it was beginning to happen, particularly the Fridays for Future movement, Extinction Rebellion. It shows that you can start to build a very large movement. We need to build that again and build it even bigger. So in principle, it's much cheaper to eat plants than it is to eat animals. And in fact, for most of our existence, certainly during the industrial era, the poorest people have eaten mostly plant-based diets, and it's the rich people who have eaten most of the meat. And to a large extent, that remains true. However, meat has been made artificially cheap and plant-based diets artificially expensive, and meat's been made cheap by massive subsidies, but also by being allowed to dump all its costs onto the ecosystem, onto the world, and those costs might range all the way from killing rivers and ripping out the soil to spreading pandemics through the human population, many of which have come from livestock farming. At the same time, fruit and vegetables, for instance, are incredibly expensive, and a lot of people can't afford those. We should be switching subsidies to subsidise the purchase of fruit and vegetables at the point of sale. At the moment, it's 5 times more expensive to eat a healthy diet than it is to eat one that's merely adequate in terms of calories. And we need to reverse that. We need to make it cheap to eat healthily. That's absolutely crucial. The human mind is the product of the interaction between a series of complex systems: the brain, the body, the physical world, the social world. And when we die, 2 of those complex systems, the brain and the body, are shut down and collapse, and can no longer interact with the physical world or the social world. And what that means is there simply isn't any biological mechanism by which there could be life after death. There's just no possibility that the same entity, the same being with the same mind, can move from the state of life to the state of death and still be there. It just can't happen. There's nothing, none of the elements required to make the mind are still in existence. And what that says to me is that even if by some fluke God exists, he's kind of irrelevant to our lives. We have one chance to get things right, one chance to live, and that's now. That's while we're alive with our minds on this planet. There is no afterlife. So we have to take the chance and make the best of it. Thanks for watching. You can get my book Regenesis in hardback or ebook or audio by clicking on the link below in the description. And don't forget to subscribe to Penguin for more videos like this.